everyone, and welcome to another episode of the UX Research Rundown podcast. My name is Henrik Mattsson. I'm the CEO of Lookback and the host for this series. With me today, I have yet again, I'm very proud of this track record. We keep having amazing guests, and today is no exception. I have with me today Bretton Fosbrook, who is a principal product researcher at LaunchDarkly. So very happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. And per ancient tradition, we always start with the origin story of our guest. So if you would just like to tell us a little bit about how you got into this field, and let's start there.
Sure. It's actually interesting. The way that I think about my beginnings in UX research is actually after university, which was many moons ago. I worked in San Francisco for an organization that no longer really exists. It was like a subset of AmeriCorps called the Digital Art Service Corps. And it was there that I worked in basically an organization called the Homeless Prenatal Program. And I ran their computer programs. And so there I worked with low and no income women, formerly homeless mothers, to teach them computers, many of them teaching them computers in Spanish. Many of the caseworkers there were also formerly homeless mothers, so they kind of trained them up in the program. And a lot of them couldn't use computers. And so they would go out of their way to transcribe notes with their in their interviews by hand, and then enter them into the computer after the fact. And I feel like for me, it was like a very important piece around how people interact with technology. And that was very formative. I did that for a number of years. I moved to Silicon Valley after that for a while, and then I got a PhD. And so after my PhD, I did a PhD in the history of technology in science and technology studies. So I studied a lot of the origins of Silicon Valley. Future thinking and strategy is a very weird dissertation. If you want to go that path, we could go there, but we don't have to. And then at the end of my PhD, I left and worked at the management school in Toronto called Rotman. And after Rotman, I moved, it was kind of serendipitous. I knew that I wanted to work not in academia. I wanted to work probably in industry, maybe a think tank. I randomly got interviewed by a company called FreshBooks, and I had to do a pitch there. So it was like at the time of case studies where I had 48 hours to do a research study. And so I did a research study where I interviewed a bunch of people that I knew that own their own small businesses. And it was actually very strange because I realized how much I loved it. So within that 48 hours, I did basically a mini research sprint, and I presented them with insights. Basically, some of their insights was about the relationship between accountant and business owners. And it was very well aligned with their strategy of what they were thinking. It helped them reframe some of what they were thinking in that meeting. So it was very serendipitous that I was I don't really know what UX research is at that point. But when I went in and I was oh, so much of this is about understanding a strategy or strategic approach, and then trying to bring data or insights to the fore to understand how we might do it. So in a way, it had nothing to do with interfaces there. It was very much a strategic question. And after I landed in that company, it was just, I was hooked. I know that was a little bit windy, but I feel like it really helps to understand how I came to how I think about it and my background, what in my background.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Be a researcher.
That's not the most windy story I've heard here. So this is it's always super interesting, and I think it's great to, same with the conversation we're going to have about your, the stuff you want to talk about on Research Week later in June, I think it is. This is I think it's great to just bring not a very curated, narrative, but more like, hey, this was like all over the place. I didn't really realize that I was going to like this thing. I just did it as an interview, for a job, and then, okay, wow, I really fell in love with it. So that's usually how it goes. But it can be hard to see that in, when you're looking at someone else's career. It looks so like, okay, the first this happened, then this, and it all looks like it was all planned out. But that's just not how it works. So that's super interesting. Cool. Well, thank you for that. And so on to the kind of main topic of this season, which is UX Research Week. You're going to be speaking at, is it at UXR Conf, or is it on one of the special days?
It's one of the special days. Colette Kalinda from Google is giving curated, experienced, I think that we're mostly ICs, IC researchers talking about, in a way, I think the prompt was, what do you wish you would have known, in a way, when you got started? So, or like, like what do you wish you would understand? You've been here for a while. What does no one talk about, or what do you wish you understood in that way?
Right. Oh, that's going to be super interesting. We're not going to give it all away now, obviously, but you can. But then you have to write an entirely different speech for that.
Exactly.
So, no one wants the extra work.
It's true. You can help me brainstorm here. I can work some ideas. We can work on some ideas together. So
perfect. That sounds great. So you told me a little bit when we were talking before that what I took away from it was basically you're going to talk about, like, in your experience, how UX research can be the calm in the chaos as fast-growing, rapidly changing organizations kind of go through all the craziness of a unicorn startup, and kind of how you can be somehow the memory of the of the organization or something like that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's one approach. That's one way to think about it. Honestly, when I pitched this talk, it was something I was struggling with myself. I think that the talk that I think the title we landed on was something around, like, is adapting to organizational or leadership changes in, like, a fast-paced scale up. But the other one that I had played around with was, like, proving your understanding your value while proving your value, basically, like, kind of like finding value while driving to be valuable. Because I find that tension that so many researchers have, where they feel there's this general anxiety about the field or how much it's changing, and a lot of times people questioning their own kind of value in that organization, or just, and so part of it was kind of a pep talk for myself at the time. And for other researchers to help them understand how much value they can bring to the table, how much research does have a place and does have a function to play, and trying to, like, develop empathy for the people around. I think with Alec, I talked about this a lot, how a lot of it is that we feel like everyone is kind of out to get research, but I was talking about, like, in my triads, or when I'm working with VPs of product or VPs of engineering, trying to understand how much everyone feels anxious, how much anxiety there is in this uncertainty for everyone, and embodying that kind of mentality has really helped me not feel like a victim, or that anyone is out to get me, and that sometimes we're just not aligned on what's important, but that we can do that collectively. So I think at that point, I'm in a very different spot now. I don't feel as anxious as I did when I wrote this talk, but I don't know. I just find that a lot of my friends who are in the research field are either getting laid off, or are feeling, like, very anxious, or new leaders are coming in, and then research feels so determined. The value of research feels so determined by your leaders. And so if a leader doesn't care about research, it can feel very challenging to understand how to be in that organization, right? Because there's, like, organizations that have a research function, and there's organizations that don't. And so it was like trying to puzzle through that. And we can talk about some examples if you want. But
I'd love that.
it was meandering there. I don't know if it resonates with you, but I find for a lot of friends it resonates.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, I've seen this more as a stakeholder of research. I've seen how, I've seen a bit of both. I've seen how refreshing it can be when a researcher breaks free of that and just brings like the research mindset. As me, as like the CEO, I just love, because I think about so many things that I don't know. I just need information. And when you have a researcher that just comes and like, not trying to prove the worth of research or something like that, but just like, what do you need to know? Like, what are the unknowns that you're thinking about right now? And then they go off and like find some answers. I mean, that's so refreshing. But I've also seen the end of the other kind of side of that, or other flip side of that coin, where you see that this anxiety is really kind of getting in the way of this kind of this approach, because then instead of actually providing value, it's very easy, and I've been there myself too, as a manager or something, instead of actually doing the thing that would provide value, you're thinking too much about how can I show my worth,
Show the
and
value.
that's not the same thing, so that's what I came to think about when you told me this.
No,
But
absolutely. It feels like a very common. I was trying to think of something that felt like most researchers in the field share, but it's not something that you can quite talk about, and to try to like make an inroad to say, just to say like, this is an issue that we all deal with, because even on my team or people that I mentor, they're like, you have it so together, you're so like you're so confident when you go into a room. And just kind of a reminder to be like, we are all, that I have my own anxieties that I bring to the table, that I'm fumbling around constantly. And that exactly, I mean, when you just said, like, when you get stuck in trying to prove your value is when you can get into a horrible and horrifying loop of not being as valuable as you could be otherwise.
yeah. And it can be hard for people to decipher whatever the word is. I can find, I know this now because of experience, right? I mean, I've worked with so many people, so I've kind of, I start seeing some of these patterns, and you can tell when people are like getting in the way of themselves, like because they, because of anxiety or something like that. But as you say, like, some people can come across as so calm, and you don't see that actually, like, it's like, what's that expression with the duck, like under the water, like the feet are going, but it looks super calm on the surface, so I think that's, being able to recognize that, and try to help people to focus is important. But tell me more about, how did you discover this? Was there like a moment where you kind of figured it out? How did that happen?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think it was a piece of feedback that I received. So part of what made me very successful, as a researcher and in my jobs, is being able to work with my product managers or work with engineers, and especially like the most research skeptical ones, and get them, like, I was very much able to contort myself in a way, and like, I'm not an abrasive person. I mean, my partner might say that's not true. She might have a different opinion. But in general, I would say I'm not
I believe you. Yeah.
I tend to be a little bit soft-spoken, and I can work on, in the way that I was able to get research through, at other companies, was to help the product manager think it was their idea, to help the product manager kind of embody this. They couldn't really tell. I felt like there was always this big gap in like who I was and what I believed, behind closed doors. Like, this product sucks. Like, I wouldn't go into the meeting with the CPO and be like, this product is going to bomb. I think it's a terrible idea. That's just was never an approach that I had. It would always just be like trying to, contort myself in a way so that I could help to say like, oh, I think this is interesting, or help the product manager or the leader believe that what I wanted them to say and believe, but over time. And I,
Mm.
I got feedback from one of my leaders that it was a bit disingenuous, and that,
Mm.
in a way I was selling myself short because I was not properly inhabiting my expertise. I think that's very interesting feedback to receive.
Mm.
That it was like, you're short selling yourself here. And I was like, well, for me, when I look at it, I was like, the end of the day, it wasn't about me, it's about the business. I was like, I want to make the right decisions for the product, honestly. I was like, at the end
Mm.
of the day, if I believe we're running afoul in the wrong way, or I believe we need to make a certain decision, um, I don't believe that I have the power or authority to make that call, and someone else does. And it took a
Mm.
leader helping me grasp that for me to say, like, oh, there's something weird here in my own thinking. I'm being very generic so that I don't like rub any leader. Like, we can talk about some examples if
Yeah.
we want, but I think part of it was understanding that that was that was me not properly valuing myself in the organization, and that in a way it it was very successful for my career and very successful for the business, but maybe not very successful for me, if that makes sense.
Mm. That's
And
interesting.
so going like moving from
Mm.
that, I've been trying to play with how but at the same time, we are also like, I work in a very culturally Silicon Valley company. LaunchDarkly is
Yeah.
in San Francisco. It's very much the world, like, being loud and opinionated and very strong willed is a virtue. And
Mm-hmm.
I struggle in some ways because I think that I'm pretty strong willed, but I'm not abrasive, or like kind of like,
Mm.
I don't always need to be right in that way. And I also think part of it was feeling like, oh, am I a mismatch for for these tech organizations, because I love it here, but I feel a need to be, that if I'm not loud in this particular way, or like, in a large meeting, I don't like stamp on the, like, just like open my mouth. I'm often taking things in. So I think those
Mm.
pieces, I was like, oh, I imagine that what makes people good researchers doesn't always translate into these worlds. And so maybe this is something that resonates with others. I don't have a solution for it, but it's
Yeah.
really something that I was more just like, oh, maybe I'm not
Mm.
alone here. And maybe, on the one hand, I'm like, I love working in tech. I love my job for the most part. Like, I think these problems are interesting. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, this isn't for me, I'm going to move elsewhere. But for me, I'm like, okay, I am who I am. I'm pretty far cooked. My personality is not going to dramatically change. I
Yeah.
think I'm valuable to the organization, but I also need to know and show up in a valuable way.
Yeah.
With that, so I think this, it's just, it doesn't. I don't have any answers, and maybe that's the joke here, is that I'm just giving these talks because I don't have the answers, and oftentimes when I don't have the answers, giving a talk is useful because I find the answers.
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, it's information. As someone who is responsible for bringing the best out of everyone on the team, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's why you're there, right? You're
Yeah,
there
yeah,
to, you know, someone hired you to give your
absolutely.
opinion and perspective and your, who
Mm-hmm.
you are, bring yourself, to
Yes.
the table. Otherwise, like, they could have just, an AI can be someone else, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, I
Yeah.
want like a non-abrasive, like, we want people to be who they are, right? but
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes I often think about this with some people I work with, and they know this, and it's not sensitive, but they're very different, and they're all very passionate about their respective roles, and it's taken a couple of years for me to like figure out how I can help everyone, to be in a place where they can bring themselves as they truly are, and
Yes.
that's how you unleash like the power of your team. Otherwise, you're just like, you have some people that are not really there. They're
Mm-hmm.
there, but their contribution isn't really there. And for someone who's me, it's like, my job is to look at a bunch of people, hear what they have to say, and then try to make a decision based on that,
Absolutely.
that information. that's just like I'm not working with all the information that I could be having. So that's like
Mhm.
super worthwhile. And it's interesting to, what you're saying about, but part of what I hear you say is like, well, perhaps this is related to your personality, but perhaps there is some sort of like standard like researcher
Mhm.
personality type too. I mean, it's like if you're a
Exactly.
good listener and you can, build rapport with
Mhm.
participants and get them to, not impose your preconceived ideas on them about the experience they're
Exactly.
having. I mean, that's kind of like to be a good researcher, you have to be a little bit like sitting back and observing a bit. So,
Well, and I think part of it too
yeah.
is just having so many leadership changes because you were like, oh, well, the
Hmm.
person who hired you, a lot of times in a lot of the organizations I was in, including where I am now at LaunchDarkly, the person who hired me is gone. The
Mm.
whole leadership team is gone. So I think it is maybe in those, and that's why it's in those moment of transitions, because
Mm.
as a tech organization changes, right, like a very small startup, I haven't been in a lot of those, is very different from like a scale up. And I've been in a
Mm.
lot of like the scale up to that pre-IPO period where you have to grow up in a lot of ways, and a lot of that, like what worked for the first 500 million doesn't work for the
Yeah.
next or whatnot. Um, and so I think that that's where it's like, I think researchers are actually quite adept in a way too, because
Hmm.
precisely what you were saying before, they're really good at listening and taking things in and taking in, like I'm pretty adaptable in how I interact with people and how I make decisions. I'm scrappy in that way. So of course researchers would actually be really great at that next phase of like, you don't need
Mm.
like just pure executors, you don't need pure strategic thinkers, you need people that are like, what do we need right now? Do we need to go fast? Do we need to be very thoughtful? And so researchers are good in that spot. And we just need
Yeah.
to recognize that in a way. And I think part of it is being like, oh, this is a
Mm.
really good place for a researcher. This is a really good time to be in this transition, and it in a way that it's super painful for a PM. Like a lot of PMs, a PM at like a 50-person organization is very different than a PM at 1,000-person organization.
Oh, for sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's
so
interesting. And it's interesting what you say. I never thought about it like that, but I think it's a good point that the researcher mindset or approach or whatever we want to call this thing, right?
yeah,
Obviously, everyone is different, but there are some interesting group characteristics here. I think like researchers will, I think, if they're good at their job, will be very adaptive to different situations because you can't be too shocked by reality because then you won't listen to what reality
yeah,
is telling you. I think it's like you have to
yeah,
read what and as there is change, you're able to navigate that change. I think a lot of people that are very loud or like that have success at a certain level of like a certain stage in an organization's growth journey, they bring their playbook and it works there, but they're incapable of changing it. And I've seen this when you try to hire, when you have a startup and you're like, we're going to get a salesperson from like this, and they can't do it because they've never been successful in a startup. They could sell for millions,
yeah,
in a kind of in a whatever 100 to 200 million thing, but they just can't do it. They can't even sell a couple of 100,000 in like a startup, right? So it's because they have their playbook and that's what they know. So
exactly. This
that's an
actually goes
interesting
well.
role. Yeah.
So it goes well, even like we could say like this is a personality thing or how you interact, this is soft skills, but I would actually say it's it's can be applied to the research toolkit as well. And
Mm,
I feel like I
yeah.
learn over and over again that that is the case. Like even like I was at Wealthsimple for a number of years. I was on the UX team for a while, then I moved to the data science team. Incredible data platform, incredible data scientist. I work with an economist, one of the best people I've worked with. So fun, so data driven. We could, do behavioral segmentation. Like, and then I was like, oh, this is the way to do research. You could do,
Yeah.
you don't just do you don't do 5 interviews. You do a behavioral segmentation. You splice, and we would cut up like, our customer base. And then from there, we would do a deep dive. It was like, and then I was like, oh, triangulation, that's the way you do it. Then I moved to my next company. My next company's data platform, it's not B2C, it's B2B. Everything is different. And then there, for some researchers, they would just like hit a wall or be like, oh no, I don't know what to do. And so
Yeah.
instead, you'd be like, oh, actually, the toolkit you need, how you recruit, even like how you recruit is different. Before it was like, gold standard. You do a survey, you run some behavioral segmentation, you do a survey, then you do your interviews, and then you have your like, this is what it felt very rigid. And I mean, I thought it was incredible, but then moving into the B2B world, you can't send a survey. Like I work in developer tools too. No developer who is forced to use a tool by their company is going to want to fill out your survey or tell you anything. And so then how you think about how you recruit becomes very different. And in a way, that's why I continue to love it, because you're like, oh, now in the B2B world, you have to befriend everyone on the revenue and sales side. You have to befriend the frontline workers because those are the people that are deeply connected with the developers. And that to me is more interesting, to say like, oh, I can actually make use of 10 interviews or a focus group. Even I was at a company kickoff now, speaking of like just being like, we were at a company kickoff, there were a bunch of speakers there, and we like impromptu through a focus group. We gathered all of the speakers into a room, and it had been so long since I'd done in-person research. There was no discussion guide. We had a couple prototypes we were working, but we set up like a circle of computers around us, and we sat them all down, and the designer like steered a prototype, like 3 different prototypes we were working on. And we went so fast, but in a way it was just because we were methodologically curious to say like, oh, we have an opportunity here to get information. There's a group of senior leaders here that are willing to give it to us, so therefore we will do it. And not every researcher, maybe not even every researcher, but it takes a particular kind of researcher to be like, right size for the job, to say like, oh, we're going to make this opportunity, we're going to extract the data, and not to think it's worse, right? Like not to be like, oh, the gold standard, which I would have before, to be like, this is the right type of information, but to say like, actually in this context, this data is just as valuable, and we can help make decisions off of it in the way that we need. So
and I think it goes back to the thing we were saying in the beginning about how sometimes researchers can get in their own way by not thinking about pragmatically about like, okay, given these circumstances, how do I provide the most value as a researcher to the most important things in my organization, right? This goes back to the whole, we can research our stakeholders, like we are the product for our stakeholders, and we can use our research skills to understand like how they would like to use the research, what they need, what the problems are that they're trying to solve, where we can help and everything. But it kind of, I've seen in my career, and I've heard a lot of examples of people that were like, well, we're going to run like the playbook of the usability test and the, the statistical significance, and it's like you just apply the same thing to different problems. So I guess I was unfair to salespeople who run a playbook. Sorry, salespeople, if you listen to this podcast. No, but this happens in research too. Yeah,
I think, honestly, I think it's because the kinds of decision we're making, there's so much uncertainty baked into it, and we don't like to admit that too, because it feels like it will degrade our craft or degrade the expertise. But and it could just be that like I did an entire dissertation on like making decisions in context of uncertainty, so I feel it feels very close to my heart. And a lot of what I believe is that there's so much creativity and intuition that goes into decision making in the context of uncertainty that no one actually wants to admit. Right?
Oh yeah.
That knowing that that's the case even if you want, like, you don't want to just have your CEO or whatever, or your CTO make up an idea and be like, do this thing. But at the same
Yeah.
time, you could say, like, like, learned expertise in a field, having intuition in this way that we can validate through experimentation or through other signals, like that can sometimes be just as valuable as, in certain contexts, as running like a large scale survey where people, like, do some sort of like max diff where you're like, this is how we do it, and then you're like, we used all of this information to build this plan, and then you build a product and like the stock market crashes or something, right? There's
yeah, exactly. It goes back, I think, to, oh, this is so interesting. I have so many questions, but I'll continue digging a bit here. It goes back, I think, to what you were saying about, the it's easy to think that everyone else just like operates with a lot of confidence and a lot of data. But in fact, building great product, like everyone involved is like, has very little data to go on. There's a lot of things that we don't know. And I think sometimes we're trying to reach too much, be too confident in the data before we can start collaborating around it. I feel like that's something that can happen too. And just like understanding that actually coming in as a researcher into a group where everyone is like, okay, well, I know my craft, but I have no idea like what's going to work, what's not going to work, like what customers are going to understand or not, what's going to be like the preferred thing, what's out there already, like what's important to people. All of these things are like, it's perfect for a researcher to come in and create that value, but they have to embrace this like complete lack of understand, like that in the team it has no idea what they're doing most of the time. They're going to gradually get data. So there's something there too about like being confident as a researcher, not because you have a lot of confident data, but because no one else does either, so you're actually contributing to the
Yeah.
to the
And
whole.
I mean, even on some of my teams now, part of the value I bring is just coming in and the team. I mean, what's great is that it's developers building developer tools. So they have and reminding them, even that, like, part of my job is just to remind them how much they know, because they're so nervous on the one hand, to remind them, you have been a developer for 15 years, for 20 years, whatever. Like, you actually have a very good sense of this. And also to say, like, let's just get our feet wet, which is a weird thing too, to say, like, let's not over test this or be too worried about like showing something, but just to, sometimes the researcher can just be the one that, not to say that you should just throw an MVP out in the world, but to say, like, LaunchDarkly is very big on a ramped launch, like where you can start small and incrementally, like at percentage roll, like at a small percentage, to reduce the risk. And I really believe in that mindset, to say, like, how quickly can we put something in production at like a small increment so that we can start, because that is the best kind of feedback. And that we've had so many projects that were like, okay, let's release this to a small group of early access participants, and if they hate it, let's give them an escape valve. Let's give them an escape hatch. So they'll go into the new experience, and we've had situations where everyone leaves, and we're like, well, this isn't going to work. And we save so much time, because then we're like, we pull back a tiny bit, slightly pivot, and then do something else, and then throw people at it. And then as soon as people are like, actually, I don't want to go back to the other experience, then that something's working. And that feels like so much of the work. It feels like so much of the work now, instead of being like, if I was like, well, let's spend a year doing a competitive analysis. I mean, all of these things are important, but if I spent a year, then we probably wouldn't have landed where we are today, because watching people interact it and use it is so much easier to understand how valuable it is, no matter if they tell you. How likely are you to use this or not? Like, if you see them actually using it, that's so much more validation than for my survey in a different world. So
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting what you said. I think I'm going to qualify what I said before that and say that perhaps it's something like this. You are absolutely correct that we do know, like a product team with the different roles and everything, does know a lot of things. Like a lot of things are known, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
experience and stuff like that, right? Um, and it's good to remind ourselves of what we actually know. Like this is, I tell my developers this all the time. It's like, hey, like we're really good at this. Like, we're
Yeah,
not gonna just like all of a sudden forget how we do this, right? And then there are some things though that are like extremely contextual, and you can't even know. And I wonder
no,
sometimes if a
absolutely.
researcher value is about like helping the team navigate the things that are like very known. Let's not spend any time on that. The things
Hmm.
that like are unknown, and then think about, well, okay, how can we know? And sometimes you can't know until you actually
Yeah,
ship something.
yeah.
um and to guide that process, because that, I don't think that's something that a lot of other people are actually thinking about. Like they're building stuff,
Hmm.
but this whole kind of like the release process that can be very long if you think about it
Yep.
like iteratively. That's a
Very
great
long.
place for researchers to come in and lead the
Hmm.
team through that, I would say.
Yeah. No, and I mean, an assumption slam is always in my back pocket.
Mhm,
I love a situation where you don't have to do net new research until you're very certain. Like
mhm.
I love brushing off old things that we've done. I love, you know, trying to understand on the team how, like what are the areas that we actually don't know about. Because I do agree with you. There's plenty of like new opportunities where I'm like, we don't know anything about this landscape, but
Yeah,
we're gonna try. And we're like, we don't, but at least we can acknowledge that in a way and say like, well,
yeah.
it's true. Like getting out there, getting our feet wet will be much faster. And maybe too, it's like that's what continues to bring me back as like a researcher, because that part is very fun. It's very interesting.
Mm.
It's hard, um, in a different way. Like it keeps what I did, 2 studies ago isn't the same. Isn't going to necessarily be that playbook that I can replay this time, even if I want it to be. Um,
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation a couple of, I think it was last season. We are talking about the very rapid development of AI being integrated everywhere, right? And it's
mhm.
like if you're thinking about understanding what role your products should play in the kind of AI dynamic, if you're thinking about that as a project, as you're developing these things, it just won't work. It's like you need to have this more kind of strategic, ongoing research that is disconnected from the specific projects. And I think that can be hard to. I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I think that I've seen that this can be hard in organizations where, like, no one in leadership or in any of the kind of the planning of the work might think about that. Even that might be something that has to come from the researcher to like actually like run these like meta projects about the landscape
Yeah,
and the technology and everything. I don't know what your experience has been there.
I actually find that I mean, I think it's contextual. And at LaunchDarkly, we have a lot of developers and our CTO who care a lot about AI and are maybe
Yeah,
even
yeah.
more ahead of the curve in that way. So I think it's different than
Mm.
but I think that's very specific. Like I was just I mean, this could be a whole other conversation about it.
Yes.
Like at LaunchDarkly, we are all asked to push ourselves into the learning mindset around
Hmm.
using different kinds of AI tooling. Like it's not only requested, it's expected. And so
Mm.
for me, even like I didn't realize in a way that the industry feels very split, but we're in a very like learning mindset organization around this. And even myself, like I've outsourced myself with like custom GPTs that the designers use to do
Mm.
certain things. And we're all asked to use Lovable and Vercel to like actually build. Even now, I build my own apps for testing purposes just because I can. So like when I'm doing a research study before, I'd have to outsource the development to the engineers. And now for certain things, I was like, oh, I'm just going to build an app because I can. And like, then I don't have to waste their time. I don't do it as well as them, obviously, because I'm, you know, using Replit or another tool that's like doing that code for me, but I'm doing it.
No, it's I think it's great. It's such interesting times now, and we do a lot of research on research teams, and you can see that this varies quite a lot from what you're describing, exactly. Where everyone is like encouraged, like jump in, use everything, to people who are like, you can't touch any of this stuff. It's like, don't use any, which there could be good reasons for it, but
and like even on our team, like I'm on a UX team now, and the like people who want to push the early adopters and the laggards, could be its own talk. Like on a UX team, you on a UX team, you have such a nice variation in AI tooling. Like you have people that are like, must do everything. I don't think anymore. Outsource my brain. I use Granola for all my apps and does my updates, etc. To people that are like, I won't touch it with, 100-foot stick or whatnot. And I wish that maybe this is where research actually comes in. As a researcher, I think it's such a beautiful thing. And I try to help both of these like divergent positions understand that that's reality, that we're going to have people that are laggards and people that are early adopters, and neither is wrong. They're just very different. And that they have very good reasons to be eager and very good reasons to be anxious, and that we could work. I wish that we could do more to, check back with me later, to work within that, because I do feel like what I worry about is that the anxious ones don't get as much support, or, they're not allowed to be as visible. Only like the like people who are evangelists. And I know that if you look at any of the data, even for developers, there's a lot of reticence towards outsourcing and automation, for precisely because you can't control what, like it has the potential to dilute expertise, even at the sense that it can make you faster.
Very good point. Awesome. Well, now I find myself in the same situation that I often find myself here. I got carried away with this very interesting conversation. I just want to have a few I think that a lot of people in the audience will recognize themselves in, what you're saying, and think that, this sounds like something perhaps there's like an unlock here, that you got some feedback and it made you think about this. They heard this podcast and it made you think about it. Like, what are some of for those people in the audience, like, what are some of the, some advice or something to start on this journey? Like, I don't know, some practical rituals, some, totally. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I love this question for myself as well. I think it would be to embrace the learning mindset and try to do things differently, right? So like for me in that situation, to say like, how do you think that you should approach it, or you would approach it? And if that's not working, or you're feeling your anxiety, just try something different. Just try slightly, whether it's in your approach, if it's in your how you feel about the research itself. Like, just embrace that learning mindset. Sometimes we get so stuck that, like, for me too, it's just been like, oh, I should try something different. I should try to, push a little. I should try to push a little in this way, or I should try to to say no more forcefully, like, no, I'm not going to do that. Or, I'm just like making stuff up here, but I would say that would be a really great way to start. We can get so stuck in our approaches and in the way we do things, and it could be anything. Experimenting with how you present information, it could be make a video. If you usually just do over text, make a video. If you always speak at your all company and it's not as successful as you want it to be, I don't know, like, do a much smaller group with like very key stakeholders, like just
Mm.
try those pieces as a way to like to own your own, even if it's just to own your own expertise, to say like
Yeah.
my ideas are good and I can come up with ideas that are meaningful, and then even if it doesn't work, you can continue to try something.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a great ending note. It makes me think that in like, in this time of AI, an AI can replace someone who is trying to please or trying to fit in or trying to. That's what AIs do. Like they understand
Yeah,
what we want to hear. They can tell us
yeah,
stuff that sounds believable. Like you shouldn't be that. You should be yourself. You should speak your mind. You should like do your thing,
yeah,
bring your expertise. And I understand that it's easy for me to say with like, my career is fine, but like I can understand this can be
yeah.
scary. There's a lot of risk in it, but there's a lot of risk in like not bringing yourself too. So
So the other thing that I would say is that there are probably allies and colleagues that you should be looking out for in your, if you are in an
mm,
organization, like just remind yourself that you're not, even if you're, I'm a researcher of one still, like remind yourself that you're not alone. Like work
yeah.
to build those allegiances and alliances, and not alliances in the sense of like talking poorly about your company or whatever, but just to say like there are people at your organization, whether it's 20 people or 10,000 people, that probably can help you navigate some of this uncertainty, and you should find them, try to seek them
Mm,
out. And I constantly remind myself of that in my own organization, that the developers that I work with are some of my favorite people in the world, and I love to go to them, and so many of them are critical, like maybe it's just like developers are just like critical and like
yeah.
stubborn and super smart and savvy with doing things that, I don't know, that just makes it feel easier to be a researcher.
Mm, mm. Awesome. Love it. On that note, let's. If you want to hear anything more, you have to come down to San Francisco for Research Week, or log in online. I'm certainly going to come down and listen to all of these great talks. But for now, thank you so much for coming on. Is there somewhere that, like, if people want to reach out, are you on social media? Do you publish
I'm
something
not
sometimes?
I'm not on social media. I hate to say add me on LinkedIn because I don't like LinkedIn. But if you're interested, if you want to talk more, I talk to a ton of researchers that I don't know. But that's where to find me. Just add me and we can. I'm happy. Like I know that many of us are out there alone in the world, so happy to to commiserate together or scheme or strategize. So that's probably the best place.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening, and happy researching, and see you next time. Bye bye.